Hey there, everybody. I am joined by Scott Church from Category 1 Games. Scott, you want to say hello?
Hey everybody, how are you doing? Thanks for having me on again, Matt. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm really excited for this chat, Scott. I mean, we did a video maybe, I don't know, 6 months ago, and we filmed it an hour, but we talked for like 4 hours. So I
It's
just think there's
true.
a lot of ground to cover, and uh, I think today we're going to try to cover kind of what's going on with the dead CCG market, what's going on with the collectibles market, digital versus physical collecting, card trends, what you're seeing, Scott. I mean, I think you've got a really good sense of collecting like no one else I've talked to, so it's fascinating. So I think I'll start with something I read today, that Gen Z is moving towards digital cameras once again, and digital cameras are going up in value. So should we buy some digital cameras? Is that the new collectible?
Oh man, isn't that funny? My wife and I gave our daughter a digital camera we had years ago that we gave it to her last year for Christmas, and she was happy as could be with it. So then she's taken, pictures with it and a little bit of video with it, and she was like so happy with it. And
It
so
just reminds
I
me,
totally see where
everything
that's
is
coming back.
cyclical. Everything
Yeah,
is cyclical. These games are cyclical, like, and they will. That means they also cycle out again, and then in 2035 there'll be another. It'll be cool again, but it just
yeah.
reminds me of that. So I'm curious, what have you kind of been seeing? So you run Category 1 Games, which is, I think, the biggest sort of store, and we kind of see some of your inventory in the background there. But you run Category 1 Games, which is probably the biggest online store for a lot of these out of print card games. What have you kind of seen in the last 6 months, and new products, what's flying off the shelf? And I'm curious to hear about your experience. Hopefully all that
Yeah,
stuff coming off the shelves. Look at
yeah, it's really interesting. I At the end of last year, once Christmas was done, I was like, I'm gonna just take a look at some of our inventory because I was noticing with Star Trek, some of our inventory levels were up while other sets of inventory levels were down. So, for example, Reflections for Star Trek, I was like, man, am I that far off on pricing? So I started looking, and I'm like, I'm really underpriced on Reflections. But then I looked at Deep Space Nine, and I'm like, why is our inventory increasing on this, and we're not seeing many sales? And so I was like, oh, I'm overpriced on this. So I was like, I got to do a huge inventory up or repricing update across the board here. So I'm probably about halfway through the games we have on our site right now. Like right now, I'm currently actually working on Star Wars CCG, about halfway through that. I plan on finishing that hopefully tonight or tomorrow. And it's really amazing because, like with Star Trek, Reflections has gone up, but just about every other set has gone down in value, except for the really hard to find ones like Enhanced Premiere and the Enterprise Collection.
or
All
all the
good
good
things
things.
was that all? Yeah, all good things basically went down a little bit, not
Mm.
much. And then motion picture, some of the higher end cards went up, but the rest of them kind of stayed about the same. So it's really interesting to see across the board. Games like Mythos, for example, or Netrunner, prices basically stayed about the same or went up a little bit. Those are kind of more niche games. They don't have a huge audience for them, but the people that are into it are really into it. Dune is kind of a game that fits into that too, but it actually has gone down. I would say in general, most of the card games, as I'm repricing them, values have gone down to around 2019 ish prices. So, like a common for some of these games, it would be like 40 cents over the past year or two, is now back down to about 20 cents. Commons or uncommons, same sort of drop. It was 50 cents before, now it's down to 30 cents. Rares that were a dollar, 80 cents. So you're kind of seeing the norm go back to how it was pre-pandemic levels, but you're seeing those like expensive cards continue to be high up in value and price. Like I just lowered Emperor Palpatine's value, but I increased Luke Skywalker's value by like $20.
Interesting. I mean, it's a really challenging task you have there of, like, how do you create a market for things that sometimes have no eBay sale data, right? Like, a lot of this
Oh, for
stuff,
sure.
it's like, you know, it never sells. Right? Like Star Wars CCG at least is like a pretty robust marketplace, right? Where there's a couple online stores, there's eBay sales. Like it feels like there's enough data points, but like Lord of the Ring foils, I'm like, a rare is worth how much? I don't know. It's impossible to figure it out, right? And sometimes every common foil is worth $3. You start getting astronomical numbers. You're like, all right, no one's going to
Right.
pay, $900 for this stuff. So I mean, I don't envy your task because I think it's really hard to price this, and then it's almost an echo chamber, right? Because you price something a certain way, and people say, "Well, Category 1 game says it's worth $100, therefore it's worth $100." That's the word of God, right? So I'm going to sell
Right.
mine for $100. It's like, well, if you want to sell yours for $100, then maybe you should price it at 90 because why would I not buy it from a reputable store versus like a guy on the internet? Well, like why?
Right.
What's the
Yeah,
incentive?
for sure. Like you said, Lord of the Rings foil rares are probably some of the hardest things to figure out pricing on. Another one that really stumped me here was Young Jedi Reflections. That set basically disappeared. Like everything online for it was gone during the recession, or not recession. Sorry, during like COVID times, pandemic times. It was gone, and I even got in a big collection of it from Jim Colson that I had traded for, and it sold out right away. And so I'm looking for prices on it, and I'm like, there's nothing on eBay sold. No other online stores have it in stock. What is the true value of this?
So
And
I
so
will
it's
say that I almost bought a Young Jedi Reflections sealed box the other day. I think
oh,
Young Jedi. Here's one of my bold predictions: Young Jedi is poised to pop. It's
sure,
so cheap. It's still Star Wars IP. Yes, there's not like a huge gaming community, but it turns out that some of like the art and the pictures on it, like they're bigger photos, right? They're bigger movie
right,
stills. Like the Star Wars CCG stuff has like text box. But
yep,
like Jedi stuff, you got a nice picture. They're good for signatures. So it's also when a set is $40, right? It's not crazy to grow to $80, right? It doubles in price because it
right.
goes up. But yeah, the
It's a great
reflection,
set.
yeah,
That's a great set or a great game if you want that foil or that signature from Queen Amidala, right? If
right.
you're wanting to spend the $500 she charges for signatures on cards, which is
I
insane.
just had a buddy send in to Harrison Ford. Guess how much Harrison Ford charges you to sign something?
I don't even know. Is it more than 500?
It is $875. And I'm like,
That's so
how
crazy.
much? I mean, his whole idea is like Harrison Ford's 80 years old or 79 years old. Like, how many
Sure.
more of these are you gonna do? Like,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
maybe he's right in that a Harrison Ford signed card will be worth, you've spent 850 on 875 or whatever, and it's immediately worth $2,000. I don't know. It's just all this stuff is speculative in small markets, but bless you for trying to actually
Oh,
price out all this stuff because it's like slogging through eBay, man, and it's rough.
and I mean that like pricing for stuff on that it's a guesstimate, right? And we have to price it to a certain degree because we need people to be able to sell it into us so we can resell it. So we almost have to on stuff that we don't know. We almost go a little higher because we want to pay more on the back end to get it in.
Mm-hmm.
And so some of the stuff we did that on the past few months, and I'm adjusting pricing. I'm like, oh man, I actually paid equal to or more than what I'm selling it for now, just because of how much prices have changed. And so I look at stuff like that. I'm like, oh man, that sucks. But like, it happens, and a lot of this is it's guesswork, it's research, it's comparing. I talked to another seller here recently for Star Wars, and I said I counted 12 other online sellers of Star Wars CCG right now on websites. Now, how active they are on getting inventory in, I talked to another seller. They said they hadn't got new inventory in 5 months. And I'm looking at my site, and we get inventory in basically every 2 or 3 days for Star Wars CCG. And I'm like, man, you went 5 months? That's crazy. But that's the thing with these games is we're working really hard to always be getting inventory in from multiple sources. We're buying collections, we're buying through our buy list, we're buying locally, and so that's the tough thing is some of these games it's hard to get stuff in like Reflections for Young Jedi and so on. But when we do get it in, do we have it too high? Is it going to sit for a while? Do we have it too low and it sells out right away? There's finding that equilibrium is really the tough thing.
Right,
And
because honestly, if you go to a site and you see everything's out of stock, it's discouraging. You think the site's
right,
junk. Right? Like it's like
yeah, yeah,
there's nothing for sale here. Everything's sold. So why do I come
right,
to like a couple of those sites you reference? Like I'll go and look. I'm like, okay, what's their prices? I'm like, oh, they don't have anything. Right? They have a bunch of
right,
copies for sale. Um,
yep,
I do kind of think that we're coming out of COVID now. I think it's safe to say Obviously COVID did lots of interesting things for the collectible market, but I do think that you're starting to see a slowdown in collecting a little bit. I just right before this, I told you, like, I got home from work like 20 minutes before because I had to go into work and just don't have the same time with a 40-minute commute. It's like you don't have the same time you used to have to sit and organize your little people.
Right. Yeah,
uh,
I think it will make an impact on the market. I'm curious to see what that will be long term. I really thought last year was going to be a slowdown year, honestly. And last year we were up quite a bit over the year before, which really shocked me because I was like, we weren't getting the stimulus checks. People were starting to go back to work last year. I really thought last year was going to be a slowdown, and it wasn't. This year's already off to a pretty good start. We're just at our average that we want to be on a daily sales basis. And so I'm kind of like hopeful. And as we're adjusting pricing and, I'm doing a lot more, I would think social marketing as far as like doing, we have a few TikTok videos. We're looking at InQuest magazine. I'm posting a weekly email that talks about updates as well as like 4 different categories we're putting on 10% off with a code. So I'm trying to like reach out more to bring people in because, like you said, people are busier now. So how am I going to reach them to come and pick up the items they like? It's kind of an interesting time.
So the thing I will say that all of this stuff, all these CCGs, they have interesting stories, and a lot of them do sort of sell themselves if you can get people. Like, if you played Star Wars CCG back in the 90s, it's not a hard ramp path to get you back into the game, right? You're like, it's very nostalgic. The cards look great. Everybody, you like Star Wars, all this stuff. It's just frankly like getting people to think about it again, right? But like once they start
Right.
seeing it and it's like, oh, this is my favorite game. I really enjoyed playing, X thing in the 90s, like X-Files. This was super cool.
Right.
Whoever played that, shout out to them. But like, people, nostalgia is powerful. It's just hard to get people's brain focused on anything, especially with the sort of fragmentation of thought that you see in like modern life, where it's like my attention span is 45 seconds now. Right? Like I can't remember anything that happened more than 45 seconds ago. And I think that's that also I think hurts games that are more like long form. Some of that Star Wars, that's like a 2-hour experience. People just don't have the time for anymore. Right. And
But I think you're seeing more of a crop up of these player committees for games that didn't really have that, like Star Wars, Star Trek, WWE Raw Deal. They've had player committees for a long time releasing sets. And you're starting to see more of these games that didn't have that takeoff right away starting to form and doing something. And that's what you're seeing, I think, coming out of the pandemic is more of these groups forming. So like just today, I saw BattleTech had a new group put together for new sets that they're going to be releasing. And they're doing like a tournament series with play mats that they're giving out that look beautiful. And so I signed up for that group, and I'm like, that's awesome. Like, I'd love to see BattleTech continue with new sets and players really backing and supporting it. And I also saw Blood Wars of all games come out with a players committee sort of thing too, where they're putting out a new set. So like all day on Facebook, I've just been seeing new Blood Wars cards over and over again just because I subscribed to that group today. And so I think we're going to see more of these games that didn't have that immediate players committee form kind of start doing something. And that's really cool to see.
Yeah, could I propose a hypothesis on that? I mean, I think a lot of the people that have loved these games are now in the work, maybe they loved it as a 17, 18-year-old and now they're, in their 30s and they have an office job where they do something in Excel, they do something in Word, or they do procurement and they're like, actually doing this for my favorite thing is not that dissimilar, right? Like creating a spreadsheet or, actually designing cards for my favorite game might be my dream job. And I have a skill set that allows me to pretty easily like update content. It's like, this is kind of similar to my job. I'm well equipped for it. So it's not like a huge barrier to entry. Like 2002, everything was more nascent, right? Like now it's like pretty easy, like throw some stuff in a Google Doc, get some sheets going, whatever. Like it's way easier to design this stuff than it was 20 years ago. And so you need a little less trailblazing. And I think you'd be a little more casual and you just hope that whatever lawyers are out there don't come after you for whatever infringing IP, which I think is always a real concern.
Well, the nice thing about some of these, like I would say, second, third, fourth tier games, BattleTech was done by Wizards of the Coast. But if you send BattleTech to a printer, who's going to look at that and be like, "Oh, this is intellectual property"? People recognize Star Wars, Star Trek, Marvel characters, even wrestling, WWE. So a lot of times those will get turned down at a printer to be made. But if you're sending in Blood Wars, who knows if you started that at home or if that's actually a game from the 90s? No one knows, right? They're not going to take time to look that up. And so as long as there's not a lawyer that's already sent that into some of these printers, it's nice because you can get that printed and have a whole new sets ready to go for your players that want to get into it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of an interesting aspect of it as well.
So, I think this is kind of a good segue into a topic I want to explore with you a little bit. It seems like right now there's a big move towards sort of digital collecting, right? Whether it's in the form of NFTs or in the form of skins for games. And I'm kind of curious on your take as someone who runs a store that it's all about physical collecting. I don't think you're going to start to collect Fortnite skins. Maybe there'll be a future way of selling those. I'm just curious. I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts on the impact of sort of digital collecting on physical products.
I think it's I think those are an interesting aspect. There's not a lot you can do with that from like my standpoint, but I think an area that stands out is like Marvel Snap has become really big, and they're using some of the images that are actually in Verse system, and so they're reusing a lot of the characters and the way you play it, where you have a like a ramp up. You have 1, 2, 3. What do they call that? Like you basically don't want to miss your turn. So you have one resource first turn, so you play a 1 cost card. Second,
like a ramp, right? Yeah, it's your ramp.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
So you're ramping up, right? There's a term in Verse that we used to use for it, and I can't remember it offhand. I think about it all the time, and now it's not in my mind. But it's interesting because Verse system and Overpower kind of have a relation to the game because it's Marvel superheroes, and it plays a lot like Verse does. And so it's like a really interesting aspect where I bet a lot of people playing that have pulled out that were Verse players are now pulling out their Verse stuff and getting back into it to a certain degree because it's so familiar, and it's like, oh man, I actually remember playing the card game. I want to get into that because I know in the Verse group a lot of people are talking about Snap. So I think it goes crossways on that. Now, how does something like the skins on different games relate? I don't know. I mean, that's been something this whole time that I look back on and I'm like, it's money that you spend, and if you're not enjoying it for the time you have it, what does it really do? Like I was thinking back the other day about cell phones in the early 2000s where you could call and you would have your ringtone would be a song, right? And you'd pay like $2 or $3 for this artist song. I had Franz Ferdinand Take Me Out as mine for years, because that was like a song I enjoyed, and so like
start as your ringtone now. I still got that. I'm gonna set that as your ringtone.
Yeah, and then you could pay to have like when someone calls you, it plays a different song for different people that call you. So it was like, people were spending money on things that once they changed phones or like we updated to smartphones, that was gone. And so or I think back at like Nintendo. With the Wii, like how many people spent money on things on Wii that you can't now use on your Switch? So there's always like these digital things that you're buying that really don't translate anymore. And so I don't know, like you have to be comfortable with what you're spending money on digitally, knowing that you're never going to get anything out of it besides what you're getting from it at that point in time. Whereas
yeah, my thought on this is I think this is more so for younger gamers, but I think that digital collecting is a gateway drug into broader collecting, because it's hard when I describe collecting to friends and other people. They're like, they just don't get it, right? They don't.
Right.
If you never collected something, whether it was stamps or pogs or trolls or whatever, you just don't get it. But I think that digital collecting in the form of skins, you're introducing sort of like rarity and scarcity as concepts, right, to people, and their brains are starting to say like, well, I really, really, really want the Valentine's Day skin that you have to play 10 hours on Valentine's Day and be a total loser, right? Like that's the only way to get the skin, and it's rare, and therefore it's commodity that's valuable. Like, I think that's sort of imprinting on a brain, like the idea of collecting, which, I mean, I will say this again, collecting is a disease. I have the disease. I can't get rid of it. I don't wish it upon anyone except everybody. And I think that, you know, digital collecting, it'll pass. Yeah, you're going to lose a lot of your stuff, as you say, but fundamentally, I think it's actually good for collecting because it gets more people into this mindset of scarcity and rarity and you know, the idea that things are you want them because you can't have them. Like that's the big idea behind collecting, right? Like, why do you want a Mickey Mantle card? You want it because you can't have it. If there was 10,000 of them, whatever you need, whatever 10 million of them, you wouldn't want it, right? But that's like the fundamental crux behind collecting. You want it because it's rare.
Right.
So
yeah, I have a neighbor that he's probably got too much money that he knows what to do with. He's been pretty successful the past few years, and so he'll tell me, he's like, "Oh, I just got these graded books in for comic books." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, what'd you get?" And he's like, "Oh, I got this Wolverine one, and I got this one." And I'm like, I know comics really well, and I'm like, those aren't rare books. But he's like, "Oh yeah, I bought this because it's Wolverine and it's cool, or this one's Carnage or Venom and it's so cool." And I'm like, he's way overpaying for stuff just because it has a grade on it. But I'm like, that was a heavily overprinted comic. It's probably not hard to find that grade on that book. But it's really interesting. I'm like, how many people are like that in these markets, kind of floating things higher than they should be because you have these whales coming in that don't know anything about it but just think it's cool, find something they think is rare, and then you never see them again. I mean, that's kind of how my buddy. So
oh, absolutely. And like he's gonna stick that in his basement in a box, or maybe it'll be displayed for a year and then it'll get displaced by something else, and then it'll be put in the box and someone will find it and not recognize he spent $7,000 on it. It's worth whatever, $3,000 or something.
So true.
I mean, thus is the fate of most of our material goods, right? That they're just going to pass through and be put in a box, but enjoy them while you can. I kind of wanted to talk about the future a little bit. I feel like we talked about the past, but you know, I think I wanted to kind of hear your thoughts on what's this next wave of nostalgia. So I talk a lot about nostalgia cycles. I am very convinced that they run in 15-ish year cycles, right? Where if you look at when special edition of Star Wars came out, it came out like 15 years after Return of the Jedi. When did Force Awakens come out? It came out 15 years-ish after special edition, right? Like there is something to be said about our minds go back to this. We're in a different phase of life, but we still love the things we always, you know, our comfort foods, if you will. And so I'm curious, you know, this 2000 to 2010 would be the next period of games that are probably going to experience this nostalgia cycle. And so what does that kind of look like? Obviously, Lord of the Rings is one. We talk about that plenty. We don't need to talk about Lord of the Rings, but what else is there kind of there that, you know, maybe in the latter half of that period, like 2005, 2010, that's sort of poised to maybe see this sort of, you know, increased interest, let's say?
So that's a really interesting aspect. I think you saw this video as well. There's someone that posted a My Little Pony collection that they had on Facebook here recently. I'm sorry, I don't remember the YouTube channel. They did a really excellent job showing off their collection. And it was really interesting to see, you know, the last few sets of that are almost impossible to find. The card quality is really low. So even cards right out of packs are scratched and don't look nice. So I think you're going to keep seeing things like that where the bronies get a little bit older and they want to finish off that collection they never had. They had the first few sets. They want to get the last few. So, I mean, that's kind of at the end of your range there because that's like 2013. But if you go back, like you got games like Card Fight Vanguard that came out in 2011. You had, I'm looking at like the list, like Fight Club came out in 2009. I'm like, did that really stick around? Not really. You know, they didn't really make an impact. I'm like, what games really came around and stuck around? You know, and you got like early Weiss Schwartz game, like some of their early releases. You've got Stargate that kind of has like a little fan following, Battlestar Galactica, Conan. And you saw some of these pop over the past few years. Like Conan really got popular because people realized how rare the game actually is and finding seal product for it. And then it completely cooled off. It's like the 5 people that were interested got what they wanted, and then no one else was interested.
Yeah, I was trying to like beat the drum on Conan there for a while, and like it just didn't hit. Like people didn't really want to watch the videos, and like I don't know. I couldn't find stride with it.
So like World of Warcraft came out in 2006. I think we're going to see a revival of that. I mean, I have friends that are playing WoW again that
Yeah,
haven't played
WoW
WoW in
Classic
years.
was released recently, or like a couple years
Right.
ago.
Yep. And so I think we're going to see a return to some of those sort of things. So I think like WoW would be something that would come up. You have like the early 2000s releases of like WWE Raw Deal, Dragon Ball Z from Score, which has kind of gone in and out of different iterations. You've got Full Metal Alchemist, Gundam, War, Hecatomb, City of Heroes. I'll just like look at the list. The one that sticks out to me is Spoils, because Spoils was a really good game, really rivaled Magic there for a while, and then I think they had a lot of internal issues, and then kind of went away. So like I just actually bought a ton of Spoils sealed product, and I plan on getting it on our site because I think that's a game that's going to hit here kind of as a swing back of people like, hey, I really enjoyed Spoils. Where do I pick up stuff for it? And it's interesting because you can still find early 2000s or mid 2000s websites with Spoils singles that they had on it. That I'm like, these sites have to be long out of business and no longer selling cards anymore. But it's like they started 4 games. There's a multiple of websites that started selling My Little Pony cards. I'm like, I'm sure those sites aren't in business anymore where they only focused on that. So, it looks like Spoils had that same sort of thing. But, what other, I'm not as familiar with kind of the Japanese kid animated shows like Digimon and stuff like that might have come out in the mid 2000s. But if they had card games, I'd expect them to have some sort of interest as they swing back. We're seeing a big, interest in what's the one Japanese show?
Dragon Ball Z. There's like 6 Dragon Ball Z card games. It's like confusing to figure out which is.
It's the one kick or so. What is it that it's like a current game that's out? One Piece. I mean, that's supposed to be hugely popular right now, but I'm like, what's the staying power of that? What will that actually look like? I know people get really excited about that. Same with like My Hero Academia. People are really excited because there's like 3 sets of that out, or I think the most recent set recently dropped. But it's based on the UFS Universal Fighting System gameplay, and it's overly convoluted and kind of confusing. And I'm like, how many sets will this last before it fades, just like every other UFS set? So I don't know. Like I'm just kind of looking.
You see a lot of these games popping. Like, yeah, there's some interesting, IP behind it, but I think people are starved right now for new stuff, new games.
Right.
And this is the big opportunity for Lorcana if it chooses to make it or not. Right. I think the jury's still out there, but you have Magic, which has been losing players every month, and then you have like Flesh and Blood, which is still like a marginal game. You have weird stuff like MetaZoo. Which maybe I'll get into MetaZoo and just do this whole MetaZoo channel. I don't even understand it. I think it's kind of like a breaking the third wall kind of game, which could be fun.
So, I mean, if you follow the history of this, it's interesting because every time Magic goes into a spiral down, other games kind of emerge and kind of take its place for a little while, and then it comes back up on top. So, I mean, even from early examples of this is you had Fallen Empires, Ice Age 4th Edition, Chronicles, and Homelands all released within a year of themselves for Magic. And it was like kind of a down period where no one really wanted to buy that. So what came along at that time? Star Wars, Middle Earth, Legends of the Five Rings. And this is like first generation of CCGs. And they all like got a lot of, help because Magic was sucking at the time and not doing a good job. Look at where we are now. Magic for the past 2 or 3 years, overprinting everything, kind of sucking. Wizard of the Coast doesn't care, doesn't hear us. And then what do they do? What's this most recent set? It's Brothers War, or I can't remember. But it's like
the Warhammer 40K, and then they moved on so quickly. But it's just like it's too much, guys. Like slow down, pump the brakes.
So it's Dominaria collectors boxes, and this set is amazing. It's got all the classics for people like myself that played in 4th, 5th, 6th edition era, where they've got like Royal Assassins in it, Shivan Dragons, like all the stuff that I enjoyed, like is in this. Icy Manipulator, Jester's Cap, it's in this new set, and this set is actually really good that just came out, and Magic fans are really happy with it. And so you go from like people so upset they're like, we're never playing Magic again, what are other games out there? MetaZoo, this, that, they're picking up other games. Magic releases a set that's really good. And let's see how the sales do on MetaZoo over the next 2 months as Magic dominates, right? Like,
Right.
I think as these new Magic sets come out that are successful, it's going to dominate and kill off these other games that are out, or slow them down a big degree. So that's what, Lorcana is coming out in the fall of this year. And Magic is supposed to be releasing their Lord of the Rings set in the fall of this year. So you've got established Titan releasing their heavy hitter of Middle Earth, and then you've got new game coming along, this Disney IP. Who's going to win in that battle? Because who's going to be splitting their dollars between that? If you're a Magic fan, you're not exploring something new. You're pulling in a whole audience of Middle Earth fans, Lord of the Rings fans buying Magic that aren't going to have that money to spend on Lorcana. So how is that going to work out? I don't know, but I'm really excited to watch and see. So
yeah, I mean, it is true with like Magic. It is like a drug where it's like if a new one, you see another hit, right? It's like then I'm in for 3
right.
sets, right? Like, and Kamigawa actually did that for me earlier this year. It was just a really fun set, right? It was fun to play, it was
Right.
easy to draft, and then I was in for like the next 2 crappy sets, and I was like, oh, never mind. this is not actually good.
Yeah.
I hate this. But
I mean, even going back to like your talk about digital games, I play Marvel Snap, and for the most part, it was pretty easy to play for free. There's a pay to play players, and then there's a play for free players. I've been a free player on it. The most recent expansion that they had for it, or new pack that you can buy for like $20, had Zabu in it, which is like Khazar's tiger, and it impacts the game so much that as a free to play player who is like level 65 most seasons without having to pay, I can't compete in it, and I'm stuck in the 30s, level 30s, and I can't get beyond that because the people paying to play it takes this crummy player and gives them such a huge advantage against those that are actually good free players. And so I actually deleted the app. I'm like, I'm not going to waste any more time on this because the season's unfair right now for anybody that's actually spending the money on it. And so I just deleted it, and I'm enjoying my time back that I was, wasting on it. So, you still there?
Yeah, sorry. I just it was cutting out for a second.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's kind of an interesting thing. So
I'm curious. One of the things, this is a question coming in from Andy Talaga. He wanted to kind of know, like, I think when you look at CCG history, it falls out around the 2010 period. You have a solidification, right? You just have, essentially it becomes Magic, Yu-Gi-Oh, Pokemon, like 2000, let's call it 2009 to 2019, right? And,
sure.
We see that period, coming back, or, how does that resonate more broadly, I think, in sort of collecting?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think you saw some really good games come out of that, like Star Wars Destiny had pretty good success coming out of that kind of dark period. That time period you're talking about too is also like the time period where people were staying inside and playing WoW at home and not going into their card stores. I would say it kind of started with Magic with Kamigawa Block in 2006, and then ending around 2011 when like Ravnica came out, I think around that time period. And it's like all of a sudden people went back into card stores, were playing Magic, and like, this block is awesome, I'm back in. And it kind of drove card stores. You saw a big influx of them ever since about 2011, 2012, coming out of the recession at the time. You also saw an explosion in board game popularity. You had the explosion of what's the game that Amazon sold that was like it had the black box with white lettering, and it was like $25, but stores would sell them for $40. And I can't think of what it's called.
You're talking about like Crimes Against Humanity?
Yeah, Cards Against Humanity. Yeah,
Cards
like
Against
that had a huge explosion. So it's like board games took off, and were easier to make, and card games kind of fell by the wayside. If you weren't Magic, it was hard to compete. So, I don't know. It's really interesting to look at like kind of that time period, because gaming kind of changed more away from like card games to board games, but there's still some card game stuff coming out, and it's kind of questionable how successful it is. Like Flesh and Blood kind of started out as an investor sort of thing, but now like they're trying to do like a pro tournament and doing different things to really get players involved. And how well that works, I guess, depends on if they make it past the next few years, and become a competitor to Magic, or is still just kind of a side game. It will be really interesting to see. Like I said, I think Spoils was an early competitor to Magic, and I see someone like Flesh and Blood being the next closest thing to it. And how long they last, I guess we'll see. But
Yeah,
I
I
hope
do
they
just
can
wonder,
keep it
like
out.
what has staying power? I mean, one of the videos I want to make, and maybe this would be a fun one to collaborate on, is I want to just chart out like the typical life of a CCG, right? Where it's
Yeah,
like you have a premier set, like a base set that's 360 or 300 whatever odd cards, and then you have 2 expansions, and then usually it kind of slows down with the 2 expansions are kind of unpopular, and then like
right.
I don't know, you can kind of chase it. Then you have a relaunch around year like 3 or 4, and whether that's special, in Star Wars might be special edition, and Lord of the Rings it's
Right.
Shadows, and then most of them last, the good ones, 5 to 7 years, and then they're done, right? That's sort of like the normal life of most
Yeah.
CCGs.
Yeah.
And they all follow like kind of the same patterns, right? But
Well, you have power creep, you have rules, you have these different things that play into it that you have to have with each set to kind of get new people in and excitement for it. But that eventually kind of like cannibalizes itself where it becomes too convoluted or too power creep where people can't play it anymore. And then how do you back off of that? And then you have to have so many sets out to be able to create a rotation of it. And so you have to last that long to be able to rotate. So it's a really interesting, how do you last that long gaining popularity. I look at like Legend of the Five Rings and kind of like Warlords and some of these games that I would view as more big tournament games but not as popular at the local store level. And how do you get more into the local store levels or area versus just big events? And there's a ton of regional games too. I mean, look at how much more popular card gaming is in the Northeast than it is, say, in most parts of California or the West. For example, like
I didn't
WWE.
realize that.
Oh, huge, huge, because it's cold in the Northeast, and you have much longer winters where people are going to be staying inside playing games. Whereas if you're in the Southwest, you're outside most of the year, or in Florida, you're outside most of the year. So like, there's a huge advantage. Most card games have so much more business in the Northeast than they do anywhere else in the U.S.
Do
And
you think
so
it's
that's
also a population density thing, right? Well, it's just easier in cities. You
sure.
got people gathered, more like-minded people are likely to be, within a couple mile radius versus, you got to drive like Iowa. I don't know how many people are interested in Flesh and Blood in the entire state of Iowa, right?
Right. Yeah. Population density. Like I'll look at how many stores there are in Wyoming. I drove through Wyoming uh, a year ago last summer, and it was like I hit up like 3 different stores, and I mean it looked like a store from the '90s that was still like barely holding on, and really terrible, locations. And it was like, man, how did these guys survive? Because there's just not a population base to keep them going, And so, like you said, like population is a big part of it. I mean, but like a game like WWE Raw Deal, that's right behind me. That's why I kind of lean back. We were the only store in Utah that supported the game, and we had 13 players. When we looked at the other tournament events being held for it, is all Northeast, a few in like Tennessee, a few scattered around, but like out of the whole state of Utah, we had one store that was running it. And it's like, you can't have a successful card game if you're only having one store in each state, if that carrying your game. So, how do you reach more of these store levels where they're pushing it and wanting to sell it? And I think that's a big challenge for most card games that they can't actually make work. So,
I mean, I think as well, like, my local game store, they have done such a great job with keeping up with the times. Like they recognize that their money maker is never going to be the products they sell. It's the events, right? It's not just the tournaments, but it's Scott's birthday party where he rents out the back of the store for $500, and that you can bring your own beer, right? It's like that kind of environment where it's like, or they have like ticketed game nights where you get free pop. or whatever. Like they do events because that's actually like how they make all their money, right? And they've
Yeah.
realized that people look to game stores not as a place of commerce or to buy things, but somewhere to find community. It's to find weirdos that have the same interest as you, right? And like find friends, and I think that's the bigger gap that they fill. It's not like buying a $60 board game that they're making $24 on it's really going to pay the bills, right? It's the events.
Well, it's that, and I don't know if you ever read Gary Ray, his Black Diamond Games blog. He's had a game store in Concord, California, now for like 15 plus years. He has that book, Friendly Local Game Store. You can pick up on Amazon. You've also got like Michael Barr of Desert Sky Games. They both blog about a lot of the stuff about business retail in the game store area, and it's really fascinating. It's hard when a lot of your customer base wants to come and play at your store but not buy anything from the store. But they also want you to be as cheap as Amazon, as quick to get to you as Amazon, and have the selection as Amazon. But they don't, but we want to use your play space for free, and we don't want to pay your retail price because I can get these things on Amazon for cheaper. So that's like, I can't imagine owning a store right now. To me, that seems really hard because it's a whole different ball game than what I'm doing online. And I don't know how you just survive with what's going on right now in the market. Like,
I think it's one of those like classic things where 10% of your customer base covers 90% of your costs, right? Like you have a couple people that just go in there and buy, a collector's booster case or something from you of X, and they're willing to spend however much to have their kid's birthday party there. It's like that.
Right.
It depends on where you are, obviously, how well resourced the folks are in that area. But, I'm in DC. Let's just say there's no shortage of people with money here that go in and rack up large bills.
I heard a stat that you need 10 whales that spend at least $100 a week with you in order to survive as a store. And that's kind of the expectation. So if you can have at least 10 people that spend $400 a month, that's $4,000. That's going to keep you in business, and then everything else is basically profit for you that everyone else that comes in and spends on. So I thought that was like an interesting stat. So, but yeah.
Well, I used to have a dream of opening up a game store, but unless I become independently wealthy from selling all my cool Star Wars cards, which is never going to happen. So, Scott,
how do you make $1 million being a game store owner? You have $2 million to start, right? Like that's the whole thing with that is like
you lost the losing process.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit of a bummer, but I think that is sort of the state of play. You have to find and cultivate. I mean, a lot of it's just relationship based. You have to find people and give them a sense of community, but they also want it for free. At the end of the day, no one wants to pay for anything.
Well, I mean, you're seeing this a lot with business in general. I mean, for the past few years, everything has basically been from Netflix to food delivery to all these different things that wanted you to sign up and were giving you a service for cheaper. They were losing money. I mean, from Twitter to DoorDash to all these things, right? So, I mean, you're an economist. I don't know how much you've looked at this aspect of it, but like all these places were living off of VC venture capital money, and now the money's due, and these businesses are having to turn a profit, and they're no longer giving away their services for a cheap price. They're having to charge to some degree or make money off of it. And so they're all now trying to figure out a model where they're actually making money instead of living off of venture capital money. And so you're seeing an increase in all these subscription-based places. Like Netflix is increasing, Disney Plus is increasing. Like all these places are increasing fees because they need to make money. So like for a game store, is that going to be the next aspect that they're, charging money for that game space much more than they were before? Are they giving out less prizes for it? It'll be really interesting to see as money is no longer as free as it was, a year ago. As people tighten up their purses and their wallets, what do they, what happens then?
Here's an idea. Everything is going towards subscription. Create a subscription service. I mean, you could do this as well with Category 1 games, but Category 1 super users, you get an extra 5% off. It's $12 a month. half the people that sign up for it forget they have it, right? It's a reoccurring
Right.
purchase, right? Like, it's like the same
I
thing at
mean,
game stores, right? You want always like VIP tables, right? You sign up for
right.
the $12 a month, whatever. Like everything is that's at least the idea. You make money off of subscriptions. And I actually have never encountered a game store doing this, but I haven't been to a whole bunch around the country, but make a little subscription. You get a little newsletter, you get a little love, you get a early access, you get a spot at the Magic pre-release table, right? Like creating incentives that people want. I think you could, there's something there maybe.
Yeah, I think the only ones I know that do it are Team Covenant out of Ohio, and I mean they have a great YouTube channel and stuff too. If you haven't checked that out, I mean they do a lot of stuff with retro gaming as well. But they do a subscription, and they did it for a lot of the living card games because they were on a subscription basis for when they came out. They would just send them to you, and so they found a lot of success with that. And they had a retail store where they didn't even have stuff for sale in the retail store. It's just a place to go and play, and then they made their money off of their subscription service. So they're the ones that kind of buck that trend of what a normal game store really looks like. So yeah, I think there's possibilities out there, and people will have to find them. I think when money gets tight on where else can we find ways to make money and profit. So it's kind of an interesting thing. I think you're spot on with all that.
Yeah. It's a fun time to be alive. I mean, it both feels like these hobbies are more vibrant than they've ever been, right? Because you have online resources. Yeah. I mean, the idea that, I can look up and probably find a screen grab of any, or just go on YouTube and find dozens of tutorials and videos and helps. Like, it's great for all these games, but it's also a bit of a strange time, right? Like we might be going to a little bit of an economic recession, but I actually think a lot of that's overblown, and I don't think that's really going to impact collecting very much, because I still think we had this chat before that,
right.
It's the mega collecting. It's actually not the mega. Like the Mickey Mantles won't drop in price because there'll still be someone with $10 million. It's the one that's like 10 to 20,000 that's like going to drop, but people are still going to want to have their, creature comforts, right? They're still going to want to have their whatever booster box. And so I don't know. We'll see. I'm not a Hasbro financial analyst here, but I think everything's going to be okay for everyone.
Well, I think it is overblown, and I think we're kind of like coming out of it. The area I live, I've seen very little difference for how people are living or what they're doing. Our friends, neighbors, that sort of thing. Very few people have changed how they're doing things, and I think for the majority of people, it's probably like that. But I'm sure there are some that times are tough, and times will things will hurt them. And that's really a shame. But I think in general, most of us are doing pretty well and just moving forward with our lives as normal. So how we decide to spend from there, I haven't really changed any of my spending habits. Have you found yourself changing many of yours?
I think the only thing I've kind of changed is I haven't really been collecting very much anymore. It's just, I think with me, like 2021 was a year where I was like trying to, or maybe 2020 really was like, I wanted to collect all these cards. I was getting back into it, completing sets. And now it's like, I have it all. And I'm like, just happy with what I have. But no, not really. I mean, it doesn't feel, it's a weird recession when you have a 4% unemployment rate and everyone just might be in houses that they bought that are too expensive. It's weird, right? And everyone became like a day trader during 2020. And now they're like, oh crap, we're all down 60%. So it's a weird time. And I think psychologically people got very addicted to like, stock market only goes up. And then it's like, wait, never mind. Everything, it's like that meme of the dog in the burning house, right?
Yeah.
But it's really, I think everything's fine.
Yeah.
Scott, why don't we wrap it up there? This has been a really fun conversation. It's great to chat. If you have comments, I think we're going to do this again. Maybe we'll make this like every 6 months or something. I don't want to, wear out my welcome with you, but it's always really fun.
No, it's a great time. I really appreciate it. It's fun to talk about it. And, I love to talk shop. And I think, if anyone approaches me and wants to just talk business or like kind of what's happening, I love it. So reach out anytime. I'm on Facebook. You can message me, Scott at category1games.com. I'm here on YouTube. We're doing an Inquest series where we're looking through old Inquest magazines. So, check that out. I mean, that's been a lot of fun. Like I said, like earlier, looking at Magic at a certain time period, I'm like, I just looked at these Inquests. I'm looking at early 2000s, 2010 scries, and it's really interesting just to see kind of, these cycles the market goes in and whatnot. Anyways, that's pretty cool. So yeah, thanks for having me on, Matt. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll definitely have you on for a follow-up conversation, and love to hear people's comments, in the chat. What did we screw up, or where we spot on, and do you have questions for next time? So thank you very much, Scott, and we'll see everybody next time.
All right. Thank you, guys.